Welcome to His Word Heals. You can visit our website at www.hiswordheals.com for free books, a Healing Scriptures with Music CD, and all of our past programs. Today's program will be part one of a multi-part series going completely through the book of Esther. Today, in the first chapter of Esther, we will make the case that Esther can be a very important key to understanding prophecy, including in the book of Revelation. It can also help us understand the times we are currently living in, leading us into the last 7 years and culminating at the beginning of our Messiah's millennial kingdom. This first program will lay the groundwork and hopefully make a solid argument that the book of Esther is very prophetic itself. Then we will continue in the next program with some very surprising parallels that may help clarify events that will be coming to pass during the tribulation. These clarifications may help dispel some long-held misunderstandings of Scripture that can rob us of our hope and may instill fear when looking at the events coming in the book of Revelation. Remember, we are commanded to fear not, because the spirit of fear is not from Yahweh, but from the enemy. So let's get started. Today we will look at Vashti, the pagan queen, versus Esther, the hidden Jew. Queen Vashti's feasts versus the king's feasts. 7 eunuchs, 7 wise princes, 7 choice female servants. Who is the guardian of the women? Who is the king? And more. We are going to compare Esther to the characters and events of Revelation and other prophetic texts. Hadassah was hidden behind the pagan name Esther. Her Hebrew or Jewish name was Hadassah. Esther is spelled in Hebrew Aleph, Samek, Tav, Resh, and without the Aleph at the beginning, this word means concealed or hidden. Aleph, Samek, Tav, Resh appears 2 times outside of Esther and also means concealed or hidden in those 2 verses. Hadassah means myrtle. Hadassah is spelled He, Dalet, Samek, He. Myrtle is spelled He, Dalet, Samek. Myrtle trees are also found in Zechariah 1, 8 through 11, a very prophetic book, of course, of the end times. There is a man, horses, and a messenger of Yahweh standing among the myrtle trees. Myrtle trees are one of 7 trees in Isaiah 41:19, and myrtle trees replace briars in Isaiah 55:13. The branches of myrtle trees are used for sukkahs in Nehemiah 8:15. Are these other passages with myrtle trees possibly a hint that Hadassah, Esther, is very prophetic? Let's start reading in Esther chapter 1. And it came to be in the days of Ahasuerus, he is the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Cush, 127 provinces. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in the citadel of Shushan, that in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all his officials and servants. The power of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces were before him, when he showed the riches of his glorified reign and the splendor of his excellent greatness for many days, 180 days. So here we see in Esther 1, 3, and 4, the king held a feast for all of his officials and servants in the 3rd year of his reign to show his riches, glory, splendor, and greatness. This corresponds with the 3rd millennium of Yeshua's reign on earth. This feast was held in the king's citadel or palace for 180 days. This also could correspond to a feast in heaven, Yahweh's throne room, for his officials and servants. 180 days in heaven could correspond with 180 months or 15 years on earth. And this is speculation on my part. But if the year 2000 starts the 3rd millennium, or the third year or third day of Yeshua's reign, Yeshua's from when he came to be on earth, plus 180 months or 15 years, takes us to the year 2015. Perhaps there was a feast being held in heaven for Yahweh's or Yeshua's officials and servants during this third year of his reign. Then 180 days, or approximately 6 months from Nisan 1, the first month of the year, goes to Tishri 1, or Yom Teruah, the 7th month. So if the king's feast in Esther started on Nisan 1 and went for 180 days, or approximately 6 months, it would have ended on Yom Teruah, or very close to Yom Teruah. Esther chapter 1 verse 5. And when these days, these 180 days, this feast, was completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 more days for all the people who were present in the citadel of Shushan, from great to small, in the courtyard of the garden of the king's palace. Whereas the first 180-day feast was held in the citadel or king's palace for his officials and palace servants, this 7-day feast which followed was held in the courtyard or garden outside the king's palace. So if heaven is the throne room or citadel of Yahweh, then the earth could be considered the courtyard or garden of the palace, could it not? So this 7 days of heaven's time could be 7 more years on earth after the 15 years which started the third millennium or third year since Yeshua's birth. Of course, this is all just conjecture or on my part, but it is interesting, an interesting possibility. So if you take the year 2000 plus 15, you've got 2015, plus 7 more years equals 2022. You will, if you haven't already been able to, please watch our program called 80 Years If Due to Strength, which can be found on Messianic Lamb Radio's YouTube channel called the Lamb Network under the His Word Heals playlist. And in there you will see that this year 2022 fits well into the timeline, as Yom Kippur 2022 would be the first trump of Revelation according to the signs in the heavens and the time period of Revelation and the 80 years if due to strength scripture found in Psalms chapter 90. But again, I won't go into that here. Please, if you have not had a chance, please take a look at that program, again on Messianic Lamb Network's YouTube channel under the His Word Heals playlist. So then in the natural, in this account in Esther, we saw that the first feast could have been the first 180 days or 6 months of King Ahasuerus' reign, leading from Nisan 1 of his third year to Yom Teruah 6 months later, or the first day of Tishri. Then this next 7-day feast would end on Tishri 8, leading toward Yom Kippur, which is the 10th day of Tishri and is the Day of Atonement or Judgment. So let's keep reading up through Esther verse 12, starting in verse 6. White and blue tapestries were fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble columns. The couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, the vessels being different from one another, with much royal wine according to the hand of the king. And drinking was according to the law. No one was compelled, for the king had ordered all officials of his house that they should do according to each one's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace which King Ahasuerus owned. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was glad with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abigatha, Zethar, Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who were in attendance in the presence of the king Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown, in order to show her loveliness to the people and the officials, for she was lovely to look upon. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by the eunuchs, and the king was very angry, and his rage burned within him. So we see in Esther chapter 1, verses 9 through 12, during this feast, this 7-day feast, after the 180-day feast, which would be the time period between possibly Tishri 1 or Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the palace that the king owned. Queen Vashti could be a picture of the pagan church holding its own feast in the churches on the earth that our Creator owns. On the 7th day, the king ordered Queen Vashti, via the 7 eunuchs, to bring Queen Vashti before his guests, for she was lovely to look upon. There's a lot here. Queen Vashti was lovely to look upon. Could that equal the beauty of the mother pagan church or Catholicism, the whore religion that doesn't honor the king? Catholicism, we all have to admit, is beautiful. There are some very beautiful churches, Catholic churches around the world, and all of their pomp and how they dress up and how they hold their worship services and all of that is actually quite beautiful or lovely to look upon. Then the 7 eunuchs could represent 7 dead Protestant churches, possibly. Eunuchs are dead. They are not able to produce life. They have been castrated, so they cannot produce life. And they couldn't convince Queen Vashti, the head of the Catholic pagan church, to honor the king's feast. They could not produce fruit. The king's 7th day feast. It's interesting. Again, this could be 7 days between Tishri 1 or Yom Teruah leading up to Yom Kippur, but also it's interesting that the king ordered Vashti to come to him on the 7th day of this feast, and the Sabbath is the 7th day and is also considered to be one of the feasts, one of our King, our Messiah, our Creator's feasts. So this 7th day feast is when the king commanded Vashti to appear before him, and she refused to appear before him, but was instead having her own feast with the women in the palace. Could that be her choosing not to honor the 7th day Sabbath, but instead some other Sabbath, some other feast, and not our Creator's Sabbath, not the king's feast? Queen Vashti, who was too busy with her pagan church feast to honor the king with her presence at his feast, refused to come before the king and his guests to honor the king. The king was angry. So let's keep reading, again starting in verse 13. So the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for in this way the king's matter came before all who knew the law and right ruling, and who were close to him, Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marsina, Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face, who sat first in his kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she did not perform the command of the king Ahasuerus through the eunuchs? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has misbehaved, not only toward the king, but also toward all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. So, in verses 13 through 15, the king consults with 7 wise men who understood the times, all who knew the law and right rulings, and sat first in his kingdom. 7 is interesting. Could this be in contrast to the 7 eunuchs, these 7 wise men 7 wise living churches or assemblies as opposed to the 7 dead eunuch churches? They are wise because they study and know the Torah, the law and the instructions, and right rulings. These 7 sat first in his kingdom. Consider Matthew 5:19. Whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called least in the kingdom of the heavens. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of the heavens. The eunuchs were probably least in the kingdom because they didn't teach or convince Vashti to obey the king's commands. Who did he consult with? He consulted with the 7 wise men who understood the times and knew the law and the right ruling, and they sat first in his kingdom. What was to be done according to the law to Queen Vashti because she did not perform the command of the king given her through the eunuchs, who obviously did not know the law well enough to convince her to come to the king's feast? What was to be done to her according to the law? Now I'll read verses 16 through 19. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has misbehaved not only toward the king, but also toward all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the matter of the queen shall go forth to all women to make their husbands despised in their eyes when they say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. And this day the princesses of Persia and Media shall say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the matter of the queen with plenty of scorn and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it does not pass away, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So, in verse 19, the decree was decided that Queen Vashti was to come no more before the king. She was to be cast out of his presence. How can we compare that to a lot of the parables that Yeshua told us about? Let's take a look. Matthew chapter 8, verses 7 through 12. And Yeshua said to him, I shall come and heal him. And the captain answering said, Master, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only say a word, and my servant shall be healed. For I too am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, Go, and he goes, and to another, Come, and he comes, and to my servant, Do this, and he does it. And when Yeshua heard, he marveled, and said to those who followed, Truly I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great belief. And I say to you that many shall come from the east and the west, and sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of the heavens. But the sons of the kingdom shall be cast out into outer darkness. There shall be a weeping and gnashing of teeth. So again, compare being in the presence of our King Yeshua, where there is light. When you can come no more before our King, where would you be? Then you would be exiled or cast out into outer darkness. And we'll see this here, that being in the presence of Yeshua or in the presence of our Creator, there is light. The further away from Him, the darker you are. So if you're cast out of His presence, where would you be cast to? In outer darkness. Let's go on and read Matthew 22, 9 through 14. Therefore, go into the street corners, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding feast. And those servants who went out into the street corners and gathered all whom they found, both wicked and good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. And when the king came in to view the guests, he saw there a man who had not put on a wedding garment. And he said to him, Friend, how did you come in here not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, Bind him hand and foot, take him away, and throw him out into outer darkness. There shall be a weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen. And if we remember, Queen Vashti was asked to come before the king with her royal diadem or crown on. and she disobeyed and didn't even bother to come before him. But she was supposed to have the royal diadem on. Is that equivalent to having the wedding garments on that this man did not have? But in either case, he was cast into outer darkness. She was cast away from the presence of the king. Then we can go on to Matthew 13:40 and 40 through 42. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity or lawlessness, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire, and there shall be a wailing and gnashing of teeth. And there's many others, let's see, such as Matthew 25:30, and cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, there shall be a weeping and gnashing of teeth. Luke 13:26 through 29, then shall ye begin to say, we have eaten and drunk in thy presence, and thou hast taught in our streets. But he shall say, I tell you, I know you not whence ye are. Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity or lawlessness. There shall be a weeping and gnashing of teeth when ye shall see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets in the kingdom of Elohim, and you yourselves thrust out. And they shall come from the east and from the west and from the north and from the south, and shall sit down in the kingdom of Elohim. So here these were cast out and others were brought in. Just as Vashti was cast out from before the presence of the king, and her position was given to another. So we see a lot of parallels here. Queen Vashti disobeyed. Also, it's interesting, she disobeyed on the last or seventh day of this second feast, the last day of this 7-day feast, which possibly started on Tishri 1 and ended on the 8th day of Tishri, or started on Tishri 2, ended on the 8th day of Tishri, something like that. Then the wise men who knew the law were consulted as to what should be done to Vashti. She could then possibly have been judged and banished from the king's presence on Yom Kippur, the 10th day of Tishri, the day of judgment or atonement. Where is the light and where is the darkness? We see 1 John 1:5 through 7. And this is a message which we have heard from him and announced to you, that Elohim is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and are not doing the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Yeshua Messiah, his Son, cleanses us from all sin. 2 Thessalonians 1:8 and 9. In flaming fire, taking vengeance on them that know not Elohim, and that obey not the gospel of the Master Yeshua Messiah, who shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of Yahweh and from the glory of his power. So let's look at that word there. It says, these that did not obey the gospel of Yeshua, or the good news of Yeshua, his message, they would be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of Yahweh. That word there, from, is apo in the Greek, as you can see in the interlinear Bible down there at the bottom. I have it circled. It is translated as from here, but you can see in the Strong's G575, apo can also mean away from something near. So that means they were punished with everlasting destruction away from the presence of Yahweh and from the glory of his power, just as Queen Vashti was cast away from the presence of King Ahasuerus because she would not obey or glorify him either. Also, it's interesting to note in the previous verse we just read that one of the reasons for her being cast away is because her disobedience, because she was near to the king, because she was in the king's palace, she was the wife of the king, her disobedience would trickle down through the king's kingdom and eventually lead to anarchy, because if the queen would not even obey the wishes of her husband, the king, then why would anyone else in the kingdom obey the authorities which were over them? And when you have no obedience to authority, no respect for authority or godly authority or appointed authority, authority appointed by God, if you do not have any respect for that authority that God or the king has set up, then you're going to have anarchy. And I think we can see the results of this anarchy and disobedience in our world today. So anyway, continuing on with where is the light and where is the darkness, to show you that Queen Vashti was a picture of being cast into outer darkness away from the presence of the king. Revelation 16:10. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. So if you're away from the light, away from the presence of the king, you're going to be in outer darkness, the darkness of the beast's kingdom. Jude 1:6 and 12 through 13. And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. These are spots in your feasts of charity, when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear, clouds, they are without water, carried about by winds, trees whose fruit withers, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots, raging waves of the sea, foaming out their own shame, wandering stars, to whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. So being in the presence of our Messiah, or in the presence of the King, is light. And when you are cast into outer darkness, you are cast away from the face or presence of our King, just as Queen Vashti was cast away from the presence of her king. Esther 1:19. We're going to continue reading. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it does not pass away, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. Okay, again, she would no longer be in the presence of the king because she disobeyed and dishonored the king. We see in verses 16 and 17 her actions would cause lawlessness throughout the kingdom if let to go, and she would be cast into outer darkness. And this is pictured again throughout Scripture. There are even many more verses than those that we covered here. In part 2, we will look at chapter 2 and see that when Queen Vashti was cast out from before the king's presence, others were drawn near, including Esther. So once she was cast out, others were drawn near. We also saw that in previous verses we read from the New Testament, from Matthew, that when those of his kingdom were cast out, others were gathered from the four corners of the earth to be drawn near. We will also see 7 choice maidens as opposed to the 7 eunuchs. So again, another contrast. We had the 7 wise men opposed to the 7 dead eunuchs. And now in chapter 2, we're also going to see another group of 7 choice maidens that are given to Queen Esther. We will also look at the guardian of the women and how Esther trusted him. The 12-month preparation of women, the timing of Vashti's being cast out from the presence of the king, and the timing of Esther and the other virgins being taken into the king's palace or presence, and the timing of Esther's consummation of her marriage to the king. We'll look at all of this and much more. So, sorry, but we're out of time today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. And please visit our website at www.hiswordheals.com for all of our past programs, a free CD MP3 download, and free Kindle edition books for download. Also, please visit Messianic Lamb Radio's Lamb Network YouTube channel and go to the His Word Heals playlist for this video, all future videos, and all of our past videos. Thank you again, and blessings and shalom to all of you and everyone in your home.